Hi, welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials. I'm here this week with Andy Benavides. How are you, Andy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Let's talk about the stories that you guys covered on this week's ThreatTraq. The first one was about a vulnerability, I guess, found in Universal Plug and Play, the return of eternal silence. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so Ganesh presented a story today about home routers that are vulnerable. And essentially what's happening is attackers are scanning the internet for these routers, and then they're compromising them and turning them into a proxy. And so what that means is if I'm a bad guy and I want to do some bad guy stuff on the internet, I don't want my IP address to be the one that's being logged as having done that bad stuff. So with a proxy, I can sort of tunnel my traffic through there and kind of proxy that traffic through it, so that on the other end, if someone's trying to look at who's performing these attacks or who's doing this bad stuff, what the IP is going to come back to is that proxy and not the attacker IP.
So how does one protect themselves from an attack like this?
Well, I think it's important to know if there are any already known vulnerabilities for any sort of hardware that you have. In this particular case, it's going to be important to know if you have any vulnerabilities for any internet routers that you have. So do some research on it. Google your particular router and the make and model of your router, and see if there's anything known for it. And if there is, most of the time there's going to be an available patch, which will basically make that attack or whatever vulnerability is present no longer present. It'll fix it. It'll patch it for you. So make sure you're doing that. In some cases, routers are exposed to the internet and have like an admin console that's available, and some routers will ship with default credentials that are inherently weak, meaning somebody can just guess them. So it's important, if you have one of those routers, to, number one, understand that you have one of those routers, and then go in and actually change that password so that anybody else who is attempting to get onto that router, it's a lot harder for them, because the password is now no longer admin or something very simple. It's more complicated than that.
Let's talk about the story you brought to us, which was about Lockbit ransomware and how it's now targeting Linux systems.
Yeah, the Lockbit ransomware is kind of a pretty well-known ransomware, especially right now. And primarily it's been a Windows-based ransomware. But somewhat recently, researchers at Trend Micro have found a Linux variant in the wild, actually, of that Lockbit ransomware. Of course, what this means is that as a Linux user, before you weren't necessarily concerned about Lockbit ransomware particularly, but now, of course, you have to be because of this new variant.
And what should you do about it?
Well, you should engage in most of the security steps that you should take for any sort of ransomware, and that is make sure that you have good system backups that are away from your system, so that if you do get hit with ransomware, there is a way for you to restore those files without paying the ransom. You want to make sure that you have low privileged users. Make sure that they remain low privileged and they don't have extra access to things. That sort of mitigates any sort of lateral movement that may occur. If an entry point was gained on your network. Make sure you have good, strong passwords that aren't crackable or guessable. I think that kind of applies anytime there's a password involved. But those are just some very high level tips. If you're serious about it, there are a lot of other suggestions online.
Now, Chris brought us a story about North Korean hackers who are hiding malware in Windows updates. Tell me how that works.
So how that works is you get an email that is a very bad email because it contains what's called a macro. And what a macro is, it's just a little bit of code that's embedded within a document, like a Word document, a doc document. And so what happens is you get this email and you open it, and that code runs. And in this case, what it does is it pulls down a bunch of bad stuff on your computer, and then it runs it. And ultimately, it's what it's doing is it's compromising your machine. So it's important to understand, when you do receive an email that has any sort of attachment, you want to make sure that you are checking for the sender who sent it to you. Honestly, even if someone sent it to you that you know, it's better to just check with them through a different medium altogether. Text them, call them, iMessage them something, just ask them, hey, did you mean to send this? Is this something that's safe? Because all it takes is one click, or in this case, a couple clicks, because all you got to do is enable macros and that's it. It's done.
And you should never enable macros, right? You were saying it's kind of no need to even deal with macros anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why most people don't know what macros are, and it's just because they're not necessarily needed anymore. It's kind of an old technology that, other technology has arisen to replace, what macros did back in the day. So it's not something that's terribly prevalent. So if a document does ask you to enable macros, that should be the biggest red flag of all red flags, and you should just not open it.
Okay, well, thank you for that great advice, Andy. Thank you all for watching. To keep up with great advice like this every week, please like and subscribe below. And if you want to take a deeper look at any of these stories, click on them and watch them in their entirety. And we'll see you next time.